Neil Peart is here, and everything is fine as long as he's safe and sound, and we're ready to go. And we're going to go past the 8 o'clock hour or the 11 o'clock hour on the East Coast, so we got plenty of time to talk to this man. And by way of introduction, I'm going to spare my guests the usual long list of well-deserved accolades that are normally recounted when one is trying to introduce this man. We all know who he is and what he's done in the past, so for this interview, I'll forgo all of that and just concentrate on this extraordinary new work that he and his bandmates Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson have created. You are about to meet Neil Peart, who is here today to talk about a brand new milestone in the career of Rush. Their new album, Clockwork Angels, is truly exceptional, so much so that we're going to concentrate exclusively on this work tonight, and history be damned. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Having conquered L.A. traffic, nothing can fear us now.
Man, it is not the easiest thing in the world, is it sometimes?
Oh, wow. Is what it is.
Well, let's just get right into this thing, because I just want to go through this album. I was so impressed with it. When did you first hit on the idea of this thematic piece?
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, actually, how it developed, because it started with the smallest seed of, I guess, late 2009. The three of us got together, actually, here in Los Angeles with our co-producer, Nick Bouge Raskulinitz, and we were talking about what to do the following year. And we talked about different possibilities of making a new album, doing a tour, and Geddy brought up the idea that he's always wanted to do a compilation of our instrumentals. And then he said, to go with it, we should do something new, maybe something a little more extended. Bing. That was the seed. And I had this idea for the steampunk world in my mind as a beautiful fictional location, something romantic, idealistic, away from the dystopian kind of future, and based upon kind of the Jules Verne and H.G. Wells' view of the future as seen from the 1860s. When I was little, I saw the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and that's kind of the aesthetic basis of it. It's a beautiful kind of future that's pre-electric, pre-internal combustion engine, in which everything in the world as I developed it is driven by clockworks, steam power, and alchemy. And alchemy, the steampunk aesthetic kind of existed before in science fiction novels and such. And I added the alchemy element as their energy source. And the source of, Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
That's right.
So I kind of brought all of that thing. It was a lifetime of reading, so many influences like that came into it. And I had 3 chapters to begin with, and they were all kind of euphonious. That was Caravan, Carnival, and Caravel, which is a kind of sailing ship. So right away there was going to be a sea adventure in there, and there was going to be a carnival in there. And that even, there are so many beautiful little spin-off stories. I did a cameo a few years ago in a movie, The Adventures of Power, about an air drummer. And the director, writer, and star in that was Ari Gold, the real Ari Gold. And his father, Herbert Gold, was a novelist in the Beat era. So in the time of Kerouac and Ginsberg, he was writing a different sort of modern but traditional novel. And there was one called The Man Who Was Not With It that was about a carnival scene in the background of that. So all of that wove into it, and it gets so many influences. So the story grew in the telling. Early 2010, we started writing songs for it, and then recorded the first 2, Caravan and BU2B, and a number of others were written at that time. And then we took a break, and did a tour. So we did the Time Machine tour through late 2010, early 2011, and then got back together last fall to start finishing the writing, doing the arranging, and recording the rest of the songs. So it was recorded late that year and then mixed early this year here in Los Angeles.
Well, very good. It's wonderful, and I did see the tour when it was here last, and that whole steampunk thing that the way that the stage is set up is just fantastic.
And we could not have planned how beautifully it would develop. We had all of that plotting for the visual look and everything way back then, and it translated beautifully into the Time Machine idea, which was a combination, a bit retrospective in the replaying of the Moving Pictures album, but we also had the 2 new songs to play and a completely new presentation, which was really the basis for this album, and we had all of that in mind at that time that the visual look for Time Machine was really the visual look for Clockwork Angels. So it was so great to stop in the middle of that, do a whole other thing. And touring, I've said many times, is so great for a band. And all of us too had another kind of a subtext going on, another ambition to become more improvisational. And we were working on that during the tour, each of us in our solo spots and then together in certain parts of the album, which was, after 35 years and more together, an amazing thing to launch on a completely new direction. We'd worked on all these years of becoming very compositional, very detail-oriented, very arrangement-oriented, such that when we recorded what we considered to be the benchmark performance of a song, all we had to do was try to reproduce that every night, and that was our goal. Try to be as good as the record. And suddenly, boom, we've struck out in a whole new direction that's much more spontaneous, and it came to fruit on this album on every level. The songwriting, the lyrics, the drum parts, and each of our individual parts on the album were so much more improvisational. Even the lyrics, while Geddy was recording some of the songs with Nick, and I wasn't there, we were emailing, texting back and forth on little changes on the fly and changing it as we went, making it up as we went along. So that was really an important spirit about, I think, how this album came together, because it appears to be a carefully structured, arranged, organized, and performed piece, as ours normally are, but in fact it was conceived and executed in that completely different way.
Which I would have never guessed, because it is this concept album, this thematic piece with this wonderful storyline running through it. That's fascinating. We're going to go through Clockwork Angels now, song by song.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask you to read the prose that tell the story. We're going to put you to work, because there's this wonderful written piece that introduces each song as kind of the narrator for the story. So let's begin with the opening piece of the album and have you read this narration.
Sure, yeah. These are, in fact, just little prose introductions that accompany the lyrics in the album. And the other interesting side note on that is I've also been working on the novelization with a longtime friend of mine, Kevin J. Anderson, and he did the heavy lifting on all of that, but I've consulted all the way along, and again, he and I exchanged notes sometimes dozens of times a day on little ideas and that. So I've spent the last 2 days, in fact, narrating the audiobook version of the novel, so I hopefully am in good practice for this. So we'll be narrating just the prose introductions to the lyrics that appear in the package. So, song number 1, Caravan. It seems like a lifetime ago, which of course it was, all that and more. For a boy, life on the farm was idyllic, but for the young man I became, that very peace and predictability were stifling, unbearable. I had big dreams, and needed a big place to explore them, the whole wide world. Near our village of Barrel Arbor, the steamliners touched down and traveled on rails along the winding Pinion River toward Crown City. Watching them pass in the night, how I prayed to get away.
And Caravan, track 1 from Clockwork Angels in this wonderful concept album. And the album begins with the song that we just heard, A Young Man. This is about a young man who's reached the age where he can finally leave home and pursue his dreams. And this is a rite of passage that we all go through, men and women, of course. And it doesn't seem to matter if you were... born in a big city or a small town or on a farm, wherever it is, you've got. And Caravan, track 1 from Clockwork Angels in this wonderful concept album. And the album begins with the song that we just heard, A Young Man. This is about a young man who's reached the age where he can finally leave home and pursue his dreams. And this is a rite of passage that we all go through, men and women, of course. And it doesn't seem to matter if you were, born in a big city or a small town or on a farm. Wherever it is, you've got to go.
An odyssey, right? It's the classic rite of passage and to go off voyaging and adventuring.
Exactly. And the line, I can't stop thinking big, particularly poignant in this guy's case, as we find out later.
Yeah, and I love the way little things come together, because I had that line early on, and then Geddy said when he was putting together the vocals and all that, he needed one more line. So I thought about it and thought, in a world where I feel so small, I can't stop thinking big. Yeah. That's one of those lines that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't asked me, for some little thing. And it's part of the great part of collaboration too.
Right.
I love the fact that, again, when I brought this in, there were only 3 chapters to the story, and it grew along the way. And a lot of times we were working kind of remotely with Getty and Alex in Toronto, and I would be sending them just pages of stuff and overwriting as I usually do. And Getty is great at trimming my excesses, as it were. So I would give him all this imagery that, you know, doesn't necessarily work well in sung vocals. So it would get trimmed back to the bones of the story, as it were. But at the same time, it was fleshed out by all the background that I did weave into it, and that will emerge in the novel.
Before we move on to the next song, I got a question from a friend of mine I work with at SiriusXM. His name is Dominic Nardella, and he's the program director of Deep Tracks and a big Rush fan. And he wanted to know about recording your drum parts for the new CD. You had a producer stand in front of you and conduct your performance with a drumstick. Is this true?
Yes, absolutely. I was so determined to be spontaneous this time, and after 45 years of playing the instrument, I had kind of developed the tools to be able to do that. I studied with a well-known drummer and teacher, Peter Erskine, a few years ago, and at the time I was really studying with him to enhance my knowledge of jazz and big band playing in particular, leading up to a Buddy Rich tribute concert. But he gave me so many good exercises and tools that over the years I practiced and learned and worked on, and they gave me such a sense of time and spontaneity that I was able to go in and play through these. I would get a demo from Getty and Alex with just, you know, guitar, bass, vocals, and a drum machine or a click track, and I would go in and play it just a few times, enough to see what might work, and then I would call in the producer, Nick, and he would stand in front of me with a drumstick. Eventually I got him a real conductor's baton, and he would conduct me through the arrangement, because in past years I would spend days just working over the song, seeing what worked, nailing down the arrangement, all the little transitions, all the little fills that foreshadowed and completed each other, and that would be a long process of refinement and a great way to work. Of course, I love a lot of the results that I got that way, but as I was saying earlier, spontaneity was a real theme for all 3 of us in different ways coming into this. So I was able to do that this time and just go out there and just start recording and see what happened, you know, and he and I would stop between takes and discuss what worked and what didn't, and he would give me lots of great suggestions, and then I would just wail through it again, and eventually we'd capture things that were only done once. And you know, there were a lot of just capturing those and putting them together, and keep that, and let me do this part again, and just getting something that was repeatable in a sense that I can learn it and play it now if I want to. But I kind of think I want to take that approach live too and play the songs with more freedom and confidence. Again, it took me that long, and my way of being, I mean, I think a lot of drummers could probably do that, are more improvisational from the beginning, and a lot of them in fact have told me over the years that they have trouble playing the same thing twice. Well, that was my pattern, my modus operandi for many years. So to step outside of that was so liberating and so satisfying to be able to produce something under completely different circumstances.
Well, and I think it's also a lesson for people who are listening. How do you get good at your craft? Well, you never stop learning.
You never stop. And people say that, well, you've got all these accolades and all that. And I say, well, yes, they're the inspiration that makes me believe that I have to keep getting better and I have to work really hard on it. And even with the tour coming up, starts in September, I've already been working for 4 months on the fitness side of it. And in another week, I'll start rehearsing for it. You know, for 3 months, I'll be preparing to be as good as I can possibly be, because I have to, you know, if there is any reputation that people are having expectations or whatever, I've got to live up to that and hopefully transcend it. That's the course of study, of practicing, of preparation, is to be even better than, you know, I ought to be.
Well, you ought to, everybody listening, including me, should take that lesson into whatever you do in life and just approach it that way, because that's the only way to keep growing. We're going to move on to the second song, which is BU2B. And I love this one. It deals with the religious beliefs of this world that you've created, in which God is the watchmaker. And he rules from Crown City through priests called the regulators.
The regulators are actually the police in this case.
They're the police.
Yeah, they're the police. But, yeah, he's grown up in a very rigid, well-organized, but, you know, well everyone's well provided for, too. You know, it's not a dystopia in that sense. It's quite a content environment for almost everyone, except our young character who needs, you know, to be free of that. And then the Watchmaker is the force of order, the deity of order, and then his counterpart, his nemesis, is the anarchist, which, you know, anarchy is really an idealistic view that we don't need leaders, right?
Right.
We're good enough, we're smart enough, we should be free. It wasn't evil, they weren't terrorists to begin with. And he is what's called in the story a freedom extremist.
A freedom extremist.
Those are the two polarities in which our young character grows up. And the title actually, BU2B, of course, stands for Brought Up to Believe. But the other guy said, oh, that title's too long. So with a bit of a snicker, I thought of modern texties. You know, I thought, okay, let's call it BU2B.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and read. Now, this is the introduction. Each time Neil's going to read, there's a bit of prose that introduces the song. Go ahead.
Yeah. And what you can't know, too, over time is how much experience you gather from all kinds of entertainment and art. And I've noticed lately that this follows very much the pattern of a Broadway show. The first song, Caravan, shows the world in which our character lives, and then this song is his soliloquy. Okay, here's my world, now here's me. We were always taught that we lived in the best of all possible worlds. The watchmaker ruled from Crown City through the regulators. The alchemist priests gave us cold fire for power and light, and everything was well ordered. We accepted our various individual fates as inevitable, for we had also been taught whatever happens to us must be what we deserve, for it could not happen to us if we did not deserve.
He just sang, because it's my favorite line of the song. And the twist of the lyric here is phenomenal. Believe in what we're told until your final breath, while our loving watchmaker loves us all to death.
I just love you to death.
I mean, and literally, he loves you until you die, but also, you know, he loves you to death in every sense of that word. That is great. That is a great piece of writing. We're going to move on to the title track, which is Clockwork Angels. And this seems to deal with the symbols and the pageantry that the priests have created to sell the doctrine of the watchmaker. Yes?
Yes. Well, this is our hero has finally made his way out of his little village, and he's come to this city, and it is truly a wondrous city. Everything is beautiful and well ordered and impressively designed, by design, of course. And the angels appear as effigies above this square, and in the middle of it they have floating globes of light, and smoke seeps up through the pavement, and it's a very mystical, worshipful kind of environment. And the thing that occurred to me there about the angels is that they are the pageantry, yes, that he's developed, but another thing that he's learned that goes back to Roman times about how to rule people, give them bread and circuses, and they will never revolt. So this is the showbiz aspect of leadership that the watchmaker has learned over time and that he dwells on. So, Clockwork Angels, the place I had most wanted to see, Kronos Square at the heart of Crown City. I had seen many images of the city before, and Kronos Square, but nothing could convey its immensity. The heaven-reaching towers of the Cathedral of the Timekeepers, or the radiant glory of the angels. Land, sea, sky, and light, bathed in the brilliant glow of the floating globes.
The title track from Clockwork Angels, and I don't know if you would know this unless you actually read the little lyric sheet that comes inside, which, by the way, I highly recommend because the artwork is stunning, and you want to follow along on the lyrics. But there's a quote from the Bible. Tell us about this.
Right. Well, in the little interlude section in the middle, the opening line is, "Lean not upon your own understanding." And I always found that a very insidious thing to be in the Bible and for people to quote. But also, and so I credited that at the bottom of the lyrics, Proverbs 3:16, I think it is. And then after that, I put, "and In-N-Out Burger milkshake," because at the bottom of the In-N-Out Burger milkshake cup, that Proverbs 3:16 is written there, and there's another verse referred to on the cheeseburger wrapper, and another verse on the French fries one. So that's a bit of extreme trivia, but so amusing that I couldn't resist putting it in.
It'll tell you either how hungry I am when I eat them or how unobservant I am. I eat those things all the time, and I never notice the Bible quotes.
Well, isn't it great, too, that the lyrics are inspired by the Bible and milkshake container?
Exactly, exactly. Very quickly, I want to ask another question my buddy Dominic sent in. I thought this was great. There's a Clockwork Angels novel coming out in September, written by your friend, science fiction author Kevin J. Anderson. And he wants to know, Dominic wants to know, did the long-form story come first, and then you condensed it for the songs on the album, or did you present Kevin with your ideas and he took it from there for the novel?
Yeah, good question, and a really nice story, too. Kevin and I had talked for about 20 years of trying to do something together that would be music, lyrics, and prose. And we started sometimes talking about a novel he was working on, and would that work, translated into music. And nothing ever came along until this one. And I had conceived the story in the skeleton of the plot, and we happened to be in Colorado with 2 shows at Red Rocks and a day off in between. And Kevin lives in Colorado, and he dictates his novels while he hikes on a little recorder. So he and I did a hike up one of the 14ers, which are the peaks over 14,000 feet in Colorado, this being one of the tamer ones, Mount Evans. And during the hike, we hammered out the story. And I explained to him the skeleton of the plot that I had. Of course, songs only have a few hundred words each, so there's only so much you can do, even with my prose preambles. But we talked about it all the way up, and he added more and more ideas to the nature of the watchmaker and the anarchist, and the fact these basic themes of order and freedom, not chaos, but freedom.
Right.
So all of that came into our talking, and certain chapters of the story, and a song, Halo Effect, for example, that song was written later on and was very much inspired by the conversation we had that day about our own lives. So we weren't just talking about the nuts and bolts of a story. We cared about this guy, because this guy was us, right? Any convincing hero, I would bet, in a novel or any form of fiction like that, he's going to be a reflection of you. So if we could get in our own youthful illusions and disillusions into it, then it made it more personal, and it makes the story that much more complete. It's not just abstractions, and it's not just about ideas by any means. It's about a kid's life and what he goes through and what he suffers to eventually give him some kind of perspective and some kind of wisdom that we'll get to later. So where we're at now in the story is where we introduce the villain. My favorite part. I love this guy, the anarchist. He's so evil. And it's set up by a character called the Peddler that just appears a couple of times through the story mysteriously. And without giving too much away, I can say that he's the watchmaker in disguise. And he travels around the land to make sure that people are content. So when he asks people, what do you lack? He wants to know that they don't lack anything, right? That's his motivation in there. He's not by any means a tyrant in the conventional sense. He's very much a benevolent dictator and thinks he's doing the right thing to look after the people. Where the anarchist, again, is a freedom extremist, but he's also very scarred and very much a malignant narcissist. So the Peddler introduces that, so I'll just read the 2 prose parts up to the anarchist. 1. The Peddler 1. A foggy woodland road, a crowded village square, the busy streets of Crown City. A wandering peddler travels the land, uttering the ageless call, what do you lack? The anarchist, walking among the people who are so content, so blind. The anarchist hears the peddler's call and sneers derisively. What do I lack? Vengeance?
And before we move on to the next track, I want to talk just a bit about this song, because I thought this was kind of fascinating, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but what struck me was, rather than coming from the point of view that the character in the song sees through the falsehoods of what he's being told or sold, or however you'd like to put it, he believes that he is this way because he was born lacking certain things.
Brought up lacking is probably more important.
Brought up lacking.
Yeah, the joke, we had a song on Snakes and Arrows called Malignant Narcissism that came from South Park, the Team America movie.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a scene in it where Lisa's the expert on terrorist psychology. And she says, it's mostly a case of malignant narcissism brought on during childhood. So we used that as the title for the instrumental on that. But that is the whole idea of this kind of thing, the missing part of me, the things I was always denied.
Right.
I'm kind of alluding to something I've got. Snakes and Arrows was about that. The Snakes and Arrows, a child is heir to, was really the theme of that particular song. And it's about not the way we're born, but the way we're brought up, and the abuses of all kinds that we're subjected to, psychological and programming,
Right.
being programmed to be a certain kind of individual that copies our parents, copies the teachers, copies the priests. All of those elements of imprintation, I think, were what I was getting at there, that this guy had. I like the quote, I am the way my life has made me,
I am, yeah.
And he's a product very much of what he's been through and what he's been denied, the missing part of me that grows around me like a cage. When I first heard Geddy sing that, it meant so much more than it did when I wrote it. It's I love that sometimes when a line really comes to comes to life by being sung, and that was definitely one of those. When he repeated that line, I got those chills. Whoa, I didn't think it was that good.
Yeah.
The missing part of me that grows around me like a cage.
Before we move on, my buddy Dominic again sent some great questions, and one of them, which I thought, well, this is a dumb question. He said, have you ever considered taking people out with you because things are so complex? And it turns out it was a brilliant question. Tell them why.
Oh, well, we have, I guess, 4 of the songs on this, maybe 5 have a full string section that we recorded in January here to go on the album. So we're talking about possibly augmenting our live performance in that way.
So it turns out Dominic gave us a good question, which was right on point there. Very good, Dom. Okay, let's move on to Carnies.
Yes, this is where our young fellow kind of finds himself. The beginning, he finds another group of like-minded, freedom-spirited kind of people and pitches in to work with them for a while. And that brings us out to the climax of the story, too, where he and the anarchist really clash in this part. And it's where he's working for the Carnies and he sees the anarchist sneaking around with this detonator device. And he calls out the alert, and the anarchist throws it at him, and all innocently he catches it. And then he calls out this warning, and all the people turn around and see him with the detonator in his hand and think, he's the anarchist. Yeah. So this precipitates his flight into exile and the next whole segment of his story, his life, his adventures.
Right.
5, Carnies. I found work with the traveling carnival, and for the Midsummer Festival in Crown City, our games and rides were set up right in the middle of the square, beneath the angels. One night, amid the noise and confusion of the crowded midway, I saw a man working with wires and wooden barrels. He stood and turned, the anarchist, holding a clockwork detonator in his hand. I called out to warn the crowd, then suddenly he threw the device at me, and I caught it automatically, just as the people turned to look my way. I escaped, but in disgrace.
We're speaking with Neil Peart, drummer extraordinaire of Rush, and we're talking about the new Rush album, Clockwork Angels, that is just out. And the reason that we're asking Neil to read some of the lines here with me is because there's these wonderful bit of prose before each song that kind of moves the story along. He has been reading this for the book, the audio book, and now he's here warmed up and ready to do it for us, and we appreciate it. Let's move on to the next song, which is the Halo Effect.
Yes, Halo Effect is the relationship song of our hero's adventures. And he, in his little village, he was betrothed to a girl that he was just expected to marry and went along with all that. And then when he traveled, he met this exotic trapeze artist, Francesca, and falls in love all over again. But she rejects him, and he thinks that she's treated him with contempt, and he's humiliated and goes off into exile with those feelings too, that he's been disillusioned basically in everything that he was brought up to believe. Good way to put it. So I had fallen helplessly in love with one of the performers. She was so different from the girl I left behind, and I was beginning to understand I had only pretended she was right for me. I pursued my beautiful acrobat obsessively until she let me be with her. Then I suffered her rejection and contempt. Once again, I had created an ideal of the perfect soulmate and tried to graft it onto her. It didn't fit. Such illusions have colored my whole life.
I think there's a great lesson in this song to not to try to project your vision of what someone should be like onto someone else. Rather, just try to find someone that is your vision, yes?
Yeah, but it's hard to do, isn't it? I mean, we all do that when we meet someone who's attractive, and that's what the halo effect in psychology is really about. The attractiveness blinds you to the essence of the person. That's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah. Got another great question from my friend Dominic. I like this one. Longtime Rush collaborator Hugh Syme did the stunning artwork for Clockwork Angels, and he says that he knows that you're very involved in that process. Do you feel Hugh's did you feed Hugh lyrics and themes and let Hugh come up with the design based on the stories in the CD, or did you sketch out a rough draft of what you were seeing in your head as you were writing?
Right. Well, it's done by the beautiful process of collaboration, really, in the truest sense. And fortunately, we had so long to work on this because we really started working in late 2009. So there was a long period while we were on tour. Hugh and I were still comparing notes on it. And it was a product of both of our inspirations, really. I gave him lyrics, of course, and the basic visual premises of the different songs and settings, and then he would take it from there and create illustrations, and then I would say, oh, this is great, but how about this and this, and that, just the same way that the three of us, Alex and Getty and I, work together on songwriting, is adding our ideas and then feeding back each other's responses to them, and that's very much the way that Hugh and I work too.
Well, that's fantastic, and man, it is great. I mean, the artwork is stunning on this thing. It really is.
Yeah, I'm very pleased with it too.
We're going to move on to 7 Cities of Gold.
Yeah, and it sounds like some myth that you would make up, but in fact, historically, the Spanish exploration of the entire American Southwest was driven by this legend. Mm-hmm. People would struggle through horrendous privations across the deserts of completely untracked wilderness at that time, except for the natives, and the natives enslaved them. That's another beautiful part. These Spaniards were wandering around, lost all the time, and they were being enslaved by the natives as they went, and then they would finally get back down to Mexico City, for example, and say, I saw the 7 cities of gold. I saw them. I just couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And then they would send out another expedition. So this absolutely inspired the whole exploration of this wonderful part of America, the Southwest, that I've traveled in so widely on foot, on 2 wheels, on 4 wheels. So I'd always been interested in that history, and it was wonderful to weave it into my story thus. The legend had passed down for generations. Far across the western sea, where the steamliners could not fly, lay a wilderness land hiding 7 cities of gold. I dared the crossing on one of the stout ships that followed the trade route to Poseidon, a tough port city. I worked there for a while on the steamliners that served the alchemy mines, then eventually set out into the Red Rock Desert. The stones were sculpted into unearthly monuments, and the country grew cold as I traveled north in search of the most famous city of gold, Cibola. Its name has sounded in my dreams since childhood.
Clockwork Angels. My guest is Neil Peart of Rush, and we are going through Clockwork Angels song by song. The next one up is The Wreckers.
The Wreckers. Narrowly escaping a frozen death in that desert, I made my way back to Poseidon and found a berth on a homeward ship. Caught in a terrible storm, we seemed to find salvation in an unexpected signal light. Steering toward it, we soon learned it was false, placed by the denizens to lure ships to their doom on the jagged reefs. They plundered the cargoes and abandoned the crews and passengers to the icy waves.
The backstory or the inspiration for this song, it's just brilliant. Tell everybody very quickly where the inspiration for the song came
For
from.
Headlong Flight, yeah.
No, for the Wreckers.
Oh, the Wreckers, yes. Well, it's actually historically true. Again, along the southwest coast of England, the county called Cornwall, the people would, first of all, they would station themselves where a ship might wreck during a storm, but then they had the brilliant idea that if they put up a false light, they could make the ship wreck and then plunder it, while, of course, they were much happier if the crew and any passengers didn't survive, because then, there would be no story to tell.
And that's a true story.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Historical truth.
All right, we're talking with Neil Peart of Rush. We're talking about Clockwork Angels, and we're going to move on to the next song, which is Headlong Flight, song I've been playing a lot lately.
Thinking back over my life and telling stories about my great adventures, they didn't always feel that grand at the time. But on balance, I wouldn't change anything. In the words of one of our great alchemists, Friedrich Gruber, I wish I could do it all again. We're
talking with Neil Peart of Rush about Clockwork Angels. Very quickly on this song, I like the fact that through all the good and bad things that's happened to this character, he wants to live it all again.
Yes, it was actually one of it was the last chapter that was added to the story and the last song to be written for it. And around that time, my longtime drum teacher, Freddie Gruber, 84 years old, had finally succumbed to the slings and arrows of time. But one thing he kept saying toward the end, he would tell stories, and he grew up in Manhattan in the 40s jazz scene, Vegas in the 50s, LA in the 60s, 70s, and up to the present day. And he would tell these amazing stories and then say, I had quite a ride. I wish I could do it all again. Oh. And I don't feel that, which is interesting to write a song from a standpoint that I don't share, because, you know, I love my life and everything that I have now, but I definitely don't want to have to do it all again at this point. So that was an interesting stance to take to write a song from someone else's point of view on their life.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to move on now to The Peddler Part 2, and
yeah, again, this is a little interlude where the peddler wanders in and out of the story, and he prompts soliloquies from the characters. And in this case, he brings up BU2B2, which my character has been through an awful lot by then. Peddler 2, the ever-wandering peddler, what do you lack? Those fateful words, what do you lack, spark an inner monologue about all that I have lost. No more boundless optimism, no more faith in greater powers, too much pain, too much grief, and too much disillusion. Despite all that, I realize the great irony that although I now believe only in the exchange of love, even that little faith follows the childhood reflex that I was brought up to believe.
Comment on that one for us, will you, Neil?
Again, just our character finds himself at the end of all these tribulations where everything that he was brought up to believe has come under fire and really has been shattered for him, basically, at this case. And it's the nexus at which he turns to his own resources and his own experience, and he holds on to some faith in the exchange of love, like I said in the little prose preamble, but he has to know how to deal with all these negative feelings and all these negative people that have been basically assaulting him throughout the story. So that leads perfectly into the wish them well thing, because I think that's a really important realization in life, that all you can do with these people is turn your back and walk away, be glad you're not that way, and wish them well. And that translates even wider among the leaders and people that are trying to do something in the world. Wish them well. You know, it's hard to understand all the negativity that goes out through all the avenues of the media and the interweb and all of that, where these people are just fulminating full of poison and toxic anger and all that, when really that's a much healthier way. If something really annoys you and you can get away from it, get away from it. If somebody's trying to do something to the best of their ability for everyone's benefit, then wish them well.
Right.
Victimized, bereaved, and disappointed, seemingly at every turn, I still resist feeling defeated or cynical. I have come to believe that anger and grudges are burning embers in the heart, not worth carrying through life. The best response to those who wound me is to...
It's wish them well, and it's a phenomenal thought, and it is, you know, turn the other cheek and all of that. The question is, can you do that in your own life, Neil?
You can try to. I think that's a realization. These last two songs really represent a kind of culmination of my own experience, my own thinking, and resolutions. I think Wish Them Well is just a resolution that we should try to do. And I think you can learn healthier ways to respond to negativity like that, and to toxic people. You know, like I said earlier, if you can avoid them, you're not turning the other cheek, because you're not going to stay there and be abused, right? You're going to say, okay, bye-bye, I'm glad I'm not like you, I am gone.
Right, because it's hard when someone is attacking you not to defend yourself. And I guess the ideal is, if you can extricate yourself from the situation, do it.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah, and don't waste your energy, too, on returning grudges and hatred and, the negative feelings that only poison you. That's one thing I've always hated about the feeling of anger. It leaves me with such a hangover after. If I get mad at someone, right, even in traffic, even if I'm, like today on my bicycle and somebody, gratuitously cuts me off, and that anger that you can carry isn't good for you, and it doesn't help the situation one bit. So if you can learn to just say, okay, you're a jerk, bye, you're not in my life.
It's almost like racism. The racist is carrying that around all the time, but he may not even know that the people that he's
Putting his hate onto,
they may not even know it.
and they are not causing it. Yes,
They're not
people
causing
have this anger and this frustration, and again, this story's woven with that. The anarchist is an extreme example, but everyone does have that. Everyone has the scars of anger and frustration and dissatisfaction with their own lives, and then they project them on someone else and blame them.
One last question from my buddy Dominic, because he was so nice to come up with all these great questions. He wanted to know if there would ever be a time when you would play this piece in its entirety on stage.
Well, at this point, of course, winding up to a tour beginning in September, we're exchanging a lot of notes about set list and which songs we would like to play and which old songs, and we're certainly going to be performing a huge chunk of it.
Good. And how do you go about, the three of you go about deciding on a set list?
Just as it ought to be, really. What about this song? What about that song? And then we go and listen to it. Yeah, that would be fun. And we bring it back, or we'll say, well, we'll try that in rehearsals and see how it feels, because sometimes you don't know a song that we haven't played for 20 years or more. Suddenly we'll play it and go, yeah, that really lives. Or it doesn't.
Or it doesn't. I see. Okay. Tell us how your buddies are doing these days, Geddy and Alex.
Oh, great. We saw each other actually at the beginning of May. We were up in Ottawa to have another award thrown at us. It was the Governor General's Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Performing Arts.
Wow.
So it was 3 days of hoopla in our nation's capital, which was a little much for this country boy, but a wonderful honor, of course, to have in our own country.
Yeah, you're not someone who rushes to be in front of the camera or to accept awards. So how do you deal with that? I mean, did you feel like, well, this is such an honor, it would be kind of bad of me not to show up?
No, I'd have no problem with that, really. But my bandmates were keen. And another bit of wisdom I've learned along the way, that if someone that you care about wants something, you have to help them get it.
Oh, well, that's very nice. That's very nice. And you know what else is nice is to hear with what kindness and respect that you speak of your bandmates after all this time. I mean, I'm sure that, there was bumps along the road, but to be at this place in your life with the three of you and being so happy about what you do, that's really a blessing.
It is remarkable, 38 years after all, but we still really do have a lot of fun together. And again, we've learned to deal with conflict in non-destructive and non-upsetting kind of ways, that we can work through and collaborate in the true sense of each idea adds to someone else's idea, and we build something out of that without too much contention these days.
Fantastic. Before I, get you to do the last song, I just want to make sure that I thank some people here. Megan Simsick for all her help in getting the interview together. Mark Abramson from Roadrunner Records. Of course, Dominic Nardella of Sirius XM, perhaps the biggest Rush fan on planet Earth, for his contribution to the questions. Michael Mossback, Mark Felsot, and my lovely wife, Helene Hodge-Ladd. Let's do the last song, The Garden.
This was the culmination of the whole story, really, and the culmination of my story in many ways. Long ago, I read a story from another timeline about a character named Candide. He also survived a harrowing series of misadventures and tragedies, then settled on a farm near Constantinople. Listening to a philosophical rant, Candide replied, "That is all very well, but now we must tend our garden." I have now arrived at that point.